This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories, and welcome to my review of Star Wars The New Jedi Order, The Unifying Force. This is the final book in the New Jedi Order series, and it was a long time coming for me to get to it. It took me about a year and 3 months to read through this series. I believe based on my first review, which is I think late August 2023. They started at the beginning of August, and I eventually managed to finish in October of 2024, so about a year, 3 months. And it's honestly just so crazy for me to finally be done with this because, as I said, a year and 3 months is a lot of time, and it took me such a long time to get through the series. Not as long as some others. I think that Channel Eckhart's Ladder is doing it, and they're at like 2 or 3 years at this point, but they're also doing a lot of other books in between it. So, yeah, honestly, this book is just absolutely insane. Easily the best in the series. Just so much insane stuff happens. It is not only the end of the war, but has just so many great implications for the future. It helps with just a little bit to set up the next books, the Dark Nest trilogy, but it also has just so many crazy, insane, and great moments throughout it. And to go with this, I'm gonna have to go by characters and their storylines until they eventually all converge together into the final battle, which is the Battle of Yuzan-Tar or the Liberation of Coruscant. Like it's like the third or fourth liberation of Coruscant because they've had to do that a lot. So let's go into it. As I said, I'm going to go by characters and their storylines since there's just so much to go through, and it is just absolutely insane how much stuff has happened in this book. This book is, and this is the original hardcover, so it's like, I think it was like 530 pages. So not anywhere close to the longest book I've read. And the longest probably would be, depending on how you count it, The Lord of the Rings, which is what I consider one book that it was split into multiple parts. In fact, if you saw this a few months ago, and a review of the nice edition of it I have, which is it has one book, but let's go into New Jedi Order now because I'm like 3 minutes and I don't know, my time isn't running right now, so last time I saw was 3:20, but I'm probably closer to 40 minutes. So starting off with the Han and Leia storyline, and this is them sort of going around the galaxy to do different missions for the Galactic Alliance before the end of the war is put into enactment, and they have some of the most interesting things that happen to them for the story, and they start off rescuing a single rebel spy who has been imprisoned by the Vong and has information about when the Vong are going to be moving their prisoners to sacrifice them. So with that, we get some pretty interesting moments with it. We have just some crazy moments throughout as they go through these rescue missions and are eventually sent to a planet to go and liberate and take out the Yamisk that is controlling the world. And they're alongside Kip Duran and an Alliance strike team. They realize that the Alpha Red virus has been deployed there, and They were actually sent there to confirm that Alpha Red was working to take out the Vong. All of them, besides the Bothan with them, are kind of disgusted by this, thinking that they've went way too far. They managed to wipe out all Vong-based life and some native life on the planet, and a single ship escapes, which will come into play later. So, the things with that are just pretty interesting with them. They eventually do go and actually do this mission and kind of go off on Alliance High Command, who decided to release this. They go to meet with Luke on Sonoma Sakat to go and prepare for the final battle. And right now I'm just talking about all the stuff that leads up to this. This honestly probably could have been broken into two books. They could have had this as a clean 20, and this could have been a duology that finished it, since there's a lot of stuff that leads up to it, and when I stop and think of it, it does feel kind of like there was two books written here, but I'm not going to complain. It still is a really great story, as I said. It's just long, and especially if you're bringing it around with you, it takes up a lot of room. But now that I've gone through the more or less what happened with Han and Leia alongside some other characters that do appear in them, so there's so many things that happen, and it's just so hard to be able to mention it all because there's so many things that happen. But next main parts of the story is sort of preparations on Xenophysika to go and take on the Vong. At the moment that the book starts with Luke and everyone, Xenophysika is still jumping through hyperspace to flee from the Vong after Nomenor in the previous book went and tried to kill the planet, and it managed to change things enough so it could throw itself into hyperspace. And it causes a lot of damage across the sentient planet, and it eventually escapes to the unknown regions where, well, further into unknown regions because it was already there. But Luke is able to convince it and the people to go and try and defeat the Vong because this is going to be really their only chance, and they need to find a way to make peace with the Vong and not just wipe them out entirely because the Jedi shouldn't be doing a genocide. And if they did, they did have Alpha Red, but they know that that is the wrong way to do the things, and it's just completely morally wrong to commit genocide on a species, no matter how evil it seems to be. Sakat does decide to return to the main galaxy and goes right outside of Yuzantar, the former, well, formerly is known as Coruscant, but it's just to keep things simple. I'm going to be calling it Coruscant throughout this, since it is only Yuzantar for the back half of the series, and is more memorably known as Coruscant. And there, it manages to cause an extreme amount of distress against the Vong people who see this living world that came, and it was something that, if they actually knew about it before they came into the galaxy, they wouldn't have enacted their invasion. Only a few people did know, but Shimra, the current Supreme Overlord, decided to overrule the previous one, took him out, and pushed the invasion forward because he wanted it. He also reveals to Nomenor that they're in fact in a war against the gods, and that the gods are actually against them because they have learned everything they can from them and now pose as a threat to the gods, but the gods are sort of a complete falsehood. I'll be talking about that in just a moment, but I do need to continue on with the main storyline for Luke and everyone, so the chaos they cause in Yuzambang society is pretty interesting because of those factors. And as Luke and everyone come in, they also manage to pull one of the moons out of orbit, and it is going to cause complete chaos on Coruscant since, well, a moon's crashing into the planet. Obviously, it isn't going to destroy all life or really destroy the galactic capital since it is a large planet, but the impact of it, which ironically enough is how the war started, with the moon being pulled down and killing Chewbacca, but it decided to cause enough damage, and it is keeping them people in Vong scared, thinking that they are going the wrong way. Shimura then uses some convincing to the people to say that this is actually a test from the gods, their final test to prove that they are worthy, and that if they could defeat the world of Zenoma Sakat, that they will be given the galaxy. And honestly, it gets just pretty interesting from this point as there is just the absolute chaos of everything going on, and the fact that this war is getting to an intense point. In fact, when Zenoma Sakat shows up, there are fleets that are sent against the Galactic Alliance at Mon Calamari and other worlds to go and engage in what the Vong think is a final battle. But when Sakat arrives above Coruscant, all Yuzan Vong fleets are recalled to the world because of the immense fear that the people of the Vong have when this world appears. And yeah, honestly, it is just pretty crazy because if the world didn't show up, there was a chance that the Alliance could have failed because they were having a false defense on Mon Calamari. Well, they sent a good amount of their forces to go and try to retake Coruscant, and the Vong were also preparing for this, sending some of their forces back, but this did delay the attack on Coruscant by a little bit, but ultimately led to the Alliance's victory, because Zenoma Sakat was the only way to go and make peace with the Vong and have them not use something like Alpha Red, while giving them victory would have made them no better than the Vong or the Empire. Now, going back to the stuff with Luke, we also learned that the Yuzan Vong priest that came alongside the disguised Nomenor and Nin Yim actually did survive his encounter with him. He wants to go and create peace with his people and the Alliance after seeing the world of Zenoma Sakat and realizing that they were wrong. So he goes and works with the Jedi to help plan their attack out, and we have the revelation, which I believe was talked about in the last book, of how the Vong were stripped of the Force, and that, in fact, their gods were creations of the Vong people to represent the Force, with everything but the god of pain being stuff to represent the Force, and the god of pain is a creation of their own, which is what the feeling of them being stripped of the Force was by their original home world of Yujantar. And we learn that the planet of Zenoma Sakat is actually the quote unquote child, because, obviously it's a little weird in terms of a planet could be giving birth, but it's essentially like, I think, a seed of the planet that was sent off when it stripped the Vong of the Force, and at that point the Vong went and turned against their home world and destroyed it, and they went to destroy all of their life in their home galaxy before leaving, which explains why Zenoma Sakat has so many similar feats of engineering and genetic engineering compared to the Vong, since it did originate from the same world as them, and it only left for the galaxy sooner than the rest of the Vong did. We do know that's based on books that come out later on, source books mainly, that the droid species that the Vong originally rose up against also made it into the main galaxy, so there was a lot of survivors from that galaxy that escaped to the main galaxy, but they were mainly Vong and some species that they enslaved in their home galaxy. But just going through this Revelation's honestly just pretty interesting, and there's one final one that is even more insane and something I didn't know about going in. And I'm so glad I didn't, because it was just probably the most insane twist of this entire series at the end, and I was completely thrown off guard by it. But at this point, we have the different groups forming up together. I do know that Jaina was going on some missions, but mainly it was her on that Mon Calamari mission that I remember as a major plot point from that first half of the book. So just going through the rest of it, it got to just so many crazy moments as we led up to this. But now it goes to complete insanity as they go to take Coruscant back. And while we do get to see the space battle and forces attempting to retake the planet, the primary focus of the entire end of the war is on Luke, Jason, Jaina, and a few others going to infiltrate Shimra's palace and confront Shimra, take him out to demoralize the Vong and have them be willing to surrender and listen to the truth of how their war was unjustified. And it eventually gets to them infiltrating the palace, working alongside the uprising caused by the Shame Ones, which ironically enough was caused by Nominor himself when he was trying to go and find a way to return to power after the humiliating defeat caused in the Vong because of spies that he had were lied to intentionally to lead them into a trap, since they figured out who the spies were. So honestly, things were just absolutely crazy. I think it's pretty interesting as we see some of those final things of Nominor realizing that Shimra is completely insane and he's going to cause the death of all his people as Shimra tries to convince the world brain to destroy the planet. And Jason uses his connection with the world brain to go and convince it to work alongside the Alliance so it doesn't get killed. So, even though Han, Leia, and a few others were sent on a mission to go and destroy the world brain, it ultimately did work out with Jason able to convince it to join their side. Once again, because Shimura managed to turn it back from being allied with Jason to going and working almost fully for the Vong. I think there was still some things that were off with it, but it was generally on the side of the Vong. So just going through that, there's also a story of Tahiri, Mara, and a few others going to help the Vong uprising. And that's where they find Nominor, who is switching sides once again, seeing that the Alliance is the best side to be on for his survival. He is captured by Mara and he is forced to be brought up to the World Brain, where he helps her save Han and Leia, who have been captured. They then, as I said, after the World Ring is convinced, go to help. Well, convinced to help them, they go to help Luke, Jason, and Jaina, who are confronting Shimura. And that battle with him is pretty intense. We then get to a moment where Luke is stabbed by Shimura's poisoned staff, MP staff, and I forgot the name for a minute. And Lucas manages to cut off Shimura's head. And they think that's going to instantly cause demoralization as people learn, but it turns out that Shimura wasn't the true Supreme Overlord. He was simply being used by a character that was always there in the background. A character I never really thought to mention because it didn't seem he was too important to the story. He just seemed like Shimmer's main minion, that is the shamed one Omni, and it turns out that he became a shamed one because he was a shaper and began to put the parts of a Yamask into his brain, which reconnected him to the Force. And through that, it was just pretty interesting to figure that out that he is the only Force sensitive Vong, and he then goes and manages to give a pretty brutal fight for Jason and Jaina since Luke is nearly fatally injured and has to be taken out by Mara. Have as Jason and Jaina go after Omni, Jaina goes after first. She sort of realizes he's force sensitive but is taken out by him. Then Jason, with enough knowledge and forewarning, is able to go and use his connections to the Vong and to the world of Coruscant and the world of Rain, using his Vong senses which he developed on the planet and his connection to the Force to be able to defeat and kill Omni. And once he is dead, he was connected to the ship, and everyone thought that was Shimmer's ship, so they thought that he was actually alive. But once the ship began to die, since it was directly connected to his life presence, and if he died, it would begin to die alongside him, it began to crash. This caused the Vong to realize that they were defeated, their Supreme Overlord was dead, and that there was no hope for them to win because the gods turned against them. The leader of the fleet orders for all Vong forces to stand down, and while most of them do, some don't get this message immediately, so they continue fighting. There is still a good amount of the book left because they need all this wrap up because it's a 19-book series, and considering Lord of the Rings is famous for its many endings and the fact that Return of the King, half of that book is just the wrap up of the story. The ring is destroyed in like chapter 2 of the back half of the book, the final book, book 6, which is in it. So there needs to be a good amount of time, but not as much time as the entire story of Lord of the Rings to go and wrap up the storylines from this. And this is basically just going over the peace talks with the Vong, them surrendering themselves, thinking they'll all be executed, but learning that in fact they are going to be essentially set free and allowed the world of Zenoma Sakat, which has agreed to house them since it does have this old relationship with them. So now that they'll be joining the world of Zenoma Sakat, they will be able to live there on a living world and keep the basics of their culture and religion without having to go into the extremes of conquering others and having a spot in the unknown regions. They will have to make some adaptations and were forced to give up basically all their weapons, which were all destroyed in Coruscant Sun. But besides that, the war is basically over. The Jedi are able to celebrate, and people go off to different points in the galaxy. Tahiri and another one of the Jedi go with the Vong on Sonoma Sakat as it leaves the known galaxy into the unknown regions to go and exist alongside itself, and they're there basically so they could go and, well, one, observe the Vong. It was another Jedi and Danny and the character of Danny. So those three Jedi go, and Tahiri wants to learn more about the Vong. The other one, who is a healer, wants to learn about different arts that the Shapers have discovered, and Danny wants to learn about the Vong herself because that's something she was interested in extragalactic species before this entire war began, and why she was one of the first ones to encounter the Vong since she was investigating into stuff like that. But yeah, honestly, just so much insanity happens. As I said, this series has just so many twists, turns, and that final one is something I didn't see coming and was so glad I didn't have spoiled when watching some random video about it in the past because, as I said, I just did not expect there to be a final twist villain in this, and it was a pretty great twist in that since I didn't see it coming and it was handled pretty well. But yeah, as I said, this series is absolutely insane. I can't believe I'm finally over with it, and I'm finally on Dark Nest. I'm going a little slower on this one. Only like 90 pages in, and I've been done with the New Jedi Order for, well, when I'm recording this, just over a week. So I'm not going through this as fast, but still at a decent pace. And it's just an odd change because, as I said, I've been in this series for such a long time that it is such an odd change. There is a little bit more of this Vong stories that I could read. There is the Invasion graphic novels, which I just got about a week ago. A little bit over. It's like a week and a few days since the day I'm recording this. But as I said, I'll look at those. But I'm gonna maybe hold off a little bit on those because I want to read through the entire New Republic series of comics, and those take place all the way at the end. So I haven't had too much time to be able to read comics, especially since it's not as easy to carry a giant omnibus of comics when average pretty long book is average size pretty long book is a pain in the butt to carry around. But yeah, honestly, this series is completely insane. I am both glad I'm done and kind of disappointed because I won't have this insane story to continue on with. And as I said, I've moved on to the next series, and I was thinking about doing Rogue Planet after this, but I decided I'm going to push that off until I go to my more random book selections. I'll probably be the first one, and then I'll be jumping through those, but I'll make that decision sometime next year since I currently have about like still like 2/3 of First Dark Nest book, then two more of those, and then the 9 Legacy of the Force books to get through. So it'll probably be about another year, maybe a little less from now until I can start jumping into random books. So I don't really need to worry about that immediately. But yeah, I want to know what you think about this book because, as I said, there's so much to talk about in it. There's probably some things I missed, but please let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.